All right. So
Okay,
again, thank you for doing this. But
yeah. So a little background on me. I spent, I've been at Montana State University now for a little over, well, 3 years, November 1st. Prior to that, I was doing some executive coaching down in San Diego for startup companies. My background is primarily general management and customer service operations. I spent about 6 years with Fidelity Investments and another 6 years with Charles Schwab. In both those organizations, I was a senior executive. I spent, as I say, 4 of my 6 years was in downtown Boston. 2 was in their Cincinnati operation, which is where I got my start. And then I spent 6 years with Schwab as a vice president general manager with Charles Schwab in their call center operations, customer service operations in Indianapolis, Indiana. After that, I spent about another 6 years with Vonage as their first vice president of customer experience. So that was kind of an interesting role to step into something they didn't know what was supposed to do. I remember meeting with the CEO that first day and saying, "So what are some of the ideas and goals you have for me?" He says, "I have no idea what you're going to do." So I was kind of make it up as you go along. But it was a great opportunity. As I say, their first experience in the world of how do you look at the customer experience and going through the whole process of mapping experiences of customers, those kinds of things.
right.
Then in between all that, I spent 8 years at Purdue University. I ran a research center at Purdue University, which is the first benchmarking study in call center operations. So we developed the benchmark survey and sent it out, and we had, I think around 500 different companies over the course of 6 years that participated in that survey. And so we were the go-to global resource when it come to asking questions about what's a company benchmark on average handle time, or what's the company benchmark on agents per supervisor, those kinds of things. So we had a lot of data. But while I was at Purdue, I taught 2 courses, one in customer relationship management and one in relationship selling. And I joined Montana State University in November of 16. So, yeah.
Okay. Talk a little bit about your role there, as I know currently you are serving as the Chief Information Officer, but you also are a strategy person, right?
Yep. So I came here on board as a director of a strategic, director of strategic initiatives is my title. And I worked with the vice president and CIO for the university, Jerry Sheehan, and he and I had worked actually at Purdue University, where I'd actually used the same concept. So while I was at Purdue back in 2004, I went into Purdue University, and while I was running this research center, the CIO came over to me and says, "Mike Trotter, you spend a lot of time in customer service. I'd like to have you take a look at my IT organization. Tell me how we're doing customer service wise." So I came back and told him, "Well, you really suck at it." It was not good at all. And Jim Bottom was the guy. He's now, he's moved on to Clemson. And I think now he's retired from Clemson as their CIO and VP of IT. So anyway, I worked with Jim, and we put together a strategy where I went out and basically I invented this process where I go out and I talk to the faculty and staff that are using IT and saying, what's the work that gets done for you? Focusing on the work, not who does it, just what's the work that gets done. And then I turn around and ask the same the IT organization, what's the work you do for these people? Like Gordy Pace, what's the work you do for Gordy? Sometimes what you find is the work that Gordy thinks he's having done for him is different than the work the IT people say he's getting done for him. And that's okay. Because really all I'm looking for is to start to cluster work types together and say, this is how much work type you have going on across this university. Once you know the work, then you can define the skill sets. Once you define the skill sets, then the structure will fall out of it. I'm not a big one on org structure. So when you look at Kotter's, dual operating systems and the hierarchy side of it, I'm not a big one on org charts, because org charts just give you a chance to point at a box and say, yeah, it's not my box. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that happens daily. It doesn't mean you don't need organizational structure, but what happens, and what we'll talk about today, is how hierarchy gets in the way of getting work done. And that's where I think the team of teams concept comes into play. Now, I didn't do team of teams when I was at Purdue, but the concepts that I did at Purdue are the same things we applied here. So as I got to Montana State University in November of 16 and started doing my assessment of 4 colleges, so I assessed the College of Engineering, the College of Nursing, Gallatin College, and EHHD, which is Education, Health, and Human Development. Now, we could have done all the colleges, but you can take a group of 4 and kind of get a sense of what's going on. I often say I could have come into Montana State University and said, I don't need to talk to anybody. I know exactly what your problems are. Well, but that would not have engaged anybody. And if you're really going to lead, you've got to engage the people you're leading. So I would have said in November of 16 when I walked in, it was communication. And it was. It was all about communication. But you know what? That's the problem of a lot of things in our companies, in our organizations today is people think by sending out one email or by sending one voicemail or even by sending a text message, everybody's just going to do what it says. And that's not the case. I come from a perspective of saying you got to say it 5 times before anybody really hears it. Because the first time you say it, it goes in one ear and out the other. Second time you say it, they think they've heard it, but they're not sure, but they don't want to ask questions and appear stupid, so they're not going to say anything. Third time they hear it, they go, I know I've heard this. And so they'll probably ask you, didn't you say this before? And you'll respond with, yes, I did. The 4th time they hear it, which is now they're starting to figure out, okay, he must mean something by this. There's got to be a to-do here for me. Otherwise, he wouldn't be talking about it. So it takes that 5th time before they finally act. And I think that part of that is just what I call active listening. I think we tend to listen to respond. We don't listen to understand. We don't ask follow-up questions. We don't stop people in the middle of a sentence and say, could you define that 4-letter acronym for me? Instead, we just sit there and write it down, not knowing what it means. And I can tell you, I've been in meetings where I've asked, what's that acronym mean? And people go, I don't know. But they put it in their email or they put it in their proposal or they put it in their presentation. So I think part of it is, I think a real key that we have to understand here, when you think about what Trotter was saying in his book and what McChrystal was saying in his Team of Teams book, is about the concept of leadership listening to those that are doing the work. But you really have to get close enough to the work, which is not as difficult in a military environment like McChrystal, but sometimes it's really difficult in a large organization like a Boeing or a Northrop Grumman or a Amazon to get close to the work. But what you can do is hold your leadership team. Those are the people down in the trenches leading smaller teams to get close enough to the work to understand what's the work that's getting done. And so that was our focus here at Montana State when I came in, was to understand the work, understand the skills required to do the work successfully, and then figure out how do we create a structure, not a hierarchy, but a structure that will support that. And that's what that whole concept, and they often refer to the McChrystal Team of Teams as networking. I would say yes, it is, and no, it isn't. Because sometimes people jump, when they hear the word networking, they immediately jump to that perspective of, well, I know a lot of people and they talk to me and I talk to them. And they think that's networking. No. In McChrystal's case, he went to Afghanistan. In the first few months, he got his butt kicked right and left. Why? Because he was structured from a hierarchical perspective. He was the 4-star general. He was going to tell everybody what to do and how to do it. So, the privates, the corporals, the sergeants, the lieutenants were all waiting for McChrystal to make a decision. And when you read the book, you find out that didn't work so well, because the enemy that they were fighting against, they didn't have that hierarchy. They knew what the work was they wanted to get done, and they went and did it. And they talked to each other about the work they did or the work they were going to go do, but they didn't wait for some 4-star general to make a decision. And McChrystal learned very quickly that he was going to not be very successful. He kept doing what he was doing, and he changed. And he brought about this, what I call, he created this environment once a day, 1 hour, I think it was an hour. I'm not even sure what the time frame was now. I can't remember from the book. But anyway, it was an hour a day or so, maybe a couple hours, where thousands of people would dial in or network in to talk through what they were doing. And McChrystal sat in the back. He had a facilitator running the meeting. Why? Because what he wanted to do was hear from those that were doing the work. He didn't want to hear about what some colonel was doing or what some captain was doing. He wanted to know what people were going to go be doing that day or that afternoon. And he did that on a daily basis. And what he did was he opened up the communication so people could learn from each other. And that's the networking that's discussed in the dual operating system from Trotter as well. It's the network is about knowing enough people and knowing what they're doing or what they've done or what they're going to do. And then you as almost as a consultative resource at times will offer what you know about that. At times as a learning resource, you'll ask them a bunch of questions to figure out, well, if they could do it all over, what would they do differently? And it's back to that listening piece. I always believe we tend to walk in, and especially when there's the title of a vice president or a senior vice president or a four-star general or a CEO or a COO, we walk into a meeting and people look at us like, well, he's got all the answers, so I'll just sit here and wait for him to give me the answers. And to be quite honest, I've learned through my own career, and I got a lot of good coaching at Vonage about using the skill of inquiry versus advocacy. So think of it this way. You walk into a meeting and you're walking into a meeting where you know you have the solution in mind. You know what the problem is, you know what you're meeting about, and you have the solution. And you could sit down at the table and draw on the board or, propose the solution to everybody in the room. What I learned at Vonage through my own leadership coaching was, Trotter, you're a smart guy. You've been in the business a long time. Walk in the room and ask a half dozen questions and have those questions written down and prepared in advance. And those questions would be prepared in such a way that you would lead the group to your solution. But they will answer your questions and that will help lead to your solution. Well, boy, that was a lot of hard work. I spent a lot more time preparing for meetings than I ever did before. But what it did do is it got me to a point of understanding that when I did those kinds of things, not only did people leave the room engaged, they left the room committed because they'd actually created a solution. And at times I found that the solution I had in mind wasn't the best. In fact, somebody took what I had in my own mind and they kind of, as I was asking questions, they came back with different responses that made me rethink that maybe my solution wasn't the best. And we ended up with a better solution because we engaged the people. And that's what McChrystal did in his tenure in Afghanistan. He listened and allowed people to talk and learn from what they did, what they experienced, and how they could share that with others. That's kind of my first few comments about this. So I'll give you a chance to ask me some questions.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about how you have applied that then on your campus.
Yep. So what we've done is the first thing we needed to do is understand that when you talk to a faculty member and you ask about IT, he thought of it as this big circle that just said IT in it. But when we, on the IT side of things, looked at things, we saw the IT group in engineering and the IT group in letters and science and the IT group in arts and architecture and the IT group in finance and systems administration. We saw all these little bubbles. Well, if the customer sees it as just one big bubble, then what we have to do is be careful that we don't let the little bubbles impact our delivery of service from the customer's perspective. And that gets back to the communication piece. So what we did was we created what we now call the IT community. So we reviewed our findings with the president, the deans, the vice presidents, the large, I'll call it large executive team here at the university. Told them what we'd discovered, and what we discovered is different people had different perspectives on what IT did or did not do or what they could do or could not do. We did keep people's names out of it because that always gets people off on a tangent, either good or bad, and that's not healthy for any discussion. But after getting the approval of that large group of people to say, yes, proceed, we rolled out, that was in May of 17, and in September of 17, September 14th, 2017, we rolled out our first IT community meeting. We called it Information Exchange. It's a term I invented for that meeting. It happens once a week for an hour and a half, It used to happen, I think, middays on Thursday. No, it happened at the end of the day on Thursday, and we moved it up a little bit in the day, but still it happens on Thursday afternoons every week. And we invited, at the time we kicked it off, we had about 150 FTE of IT people. That'd be anybody with an IT title. Everybody got invited. Not everybody showed up. That's okay. What we come to understand is in some cases, people had IT titles, but when we looked at the work they did, they weren't doing IT work. They were given an IT title so we could pay them more money. But that has now kind of solved itself. We've solved that problem through the process. In today's world, we still have that same IT community meeting called Information Exchange once a week on Thursdays from 3 to 4:30 in the afternoon. We invite now all 128 people that are in the IT community to come in. They can either come in physically to the room where we're at, which handles about 45 people, or they can dial in on a WebEx session and they can listen and see. Those meetings are for people, initially they were for people to share what they were doing in their college or their department, how they were doing it, what their structure was in their college or department, and what their goals were, what they were trying to do strategically as well as tactically. They have now become such that we still have people coming in saying, I'm about to launch into doing this XYZ. I might be upgrading computers in a lab or doing something like that, or I'm looking for a piece of software that does something that I can't get done right now. And what that allows the IT community to do is ask questions, find out what the person really, what resources do they think they need, what resources do they think they have, and is there any way I can help? Now, we're not perfect yet. We're only 2 years into this, a little over 2 years. But we're a lot further down the path in terms of people starting to understand, if I could find a little resource time to help that person, that's a good thing. Because if I help them, in the future, I might need help and they can help me. But the big piece was, and this is what we continue to hear, is I get a chance to work with and meet the people that I used to know the names of, but I'd never seen them face to face nor heard them voice to voice. So the information exchange has become this sharing environment, and it really does apply like McChrystal's once a day meeting, where people come in and say, here's what I'm going to go do, and this is what I'm expecting to accomplish. And then people can say, well, if you're going to do that, you won't accomplish what you think you're going to accomplish. And it's given people a chance to kind of get to know each other, to resource each other in terms of what we know in terms of the entire IT community. We have now included the other 3 campuses, that being Great Falls, Northern, and Billings. So their head of IT in each of those locations also dials in, and we're trying to get more of their resources to dial in as well. But the point being is it just opens up the communication process. We haven't got 100% of the IT people engaged with us, because some people have said, nope, I'm just going to wait till you go away and it'll go back to normal, where, we've got the hierarchy and it'll just work the way it's supposed to, which is you'll tell me what to do and I'll go do it. So I think that's kind of initially how we've applied it. One of the results we have is what we call a software atlas. So, being a university with 4 campuses, there's software everywhere, and if I can get a free version of a software, I go out and get it. God bless you. What we have found is, it took the time, and it was a cross-sectional team from the IT community. It wasn't just some sort of centralized group, put together an environment where people could go post the software that they own, whether it was free or purchased, how many seats or how many computers it could be on, or was there a limit or not a limit. And it really opened up people's eyes to find out that, gee, I didn't know we already had that software. Or in some cases, we found out we had 3 or 4 different groups that own the same software. Well, why not buy a single license and share it amongst the team? So that's a couple of the things we've learned. I can tell you that I'm starting to apply these same concepts to what they call the MUS system. So the Montana University System, which would be University of Montana and its conglomerate of schools and colleges, with the idea being maybe there's some opportunities for apply the same concepts at a little broader scale.
Are you creating any teams that are pulling people from various areas of the hierarchy and
Yep.
putting them on
Yep.
strategic initiatives and doing
Yep.
that
So
part of
what, yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So how we create a team. So we don't have any group do just, when we create a team, it doesn't mean that teams don't exist within some of these other groups. And let me step back and explain. The other thing we didn't do was centralize anything. And we also didn't distribute anything, because distributed means you can do everything by yourself. The term we use is embedded. We left the people that were embedded, all those little bubbles that people I talked about earlier, we left those embedded in the organizations they were in. And we said their primary goal is to serve the organization they're already serving. So we didn't change the work they were doing. We didn't say, you've got to stop doing this work and start doing that work. We said, keep doing the great work you're doing, but over the course of time, we'll identify opportunities where you might find some time cycles, some cycles of time that you can say, hey, look, I've got a person that can do this, or do this. Or we can walk into an information exchange and say, we're looking for people that have this kind of a skill set. It might be a couple hours a week. It won't be full-time. It will never be full-time, but it might be a couple hours a week where you can then turn around and say, yeah, I could use that person on this project. And so our teams don't come from one group as a team. They come from different people across our IT community. At first, we tried volunteering, and now what we've had to do is kind of move to the point of saying, well, here's the skill set we have. Who has the skill set? And of course, people are still learning to trust each other, because what they don't want to do is have you walk in and say, oh, you got that skill? Well, guess what, Gordy, you're going to come to work for me for 6 months. And then your boss says, well, now how am I going to backfill Gordy's role, right? So we've not done that at all. What we've said is, hey, if Gordy has some skill sets, we'd like to use him a couple hours a week. And the bosses are usually, the supervisors and managers are usually willing to say, well, let's try it and see how it works. If all of a sudden we can't get all our work done because Gordy's doing that 2 hours a week, we'll make an adjustment. One of the key concepts that we talk about in our team of teams here at Montana State is change, assess, change again. And that's, we rolled that out in our original presentations around what team of teams is. And so you go do something, so you change and do something, you learn from it, you assess what you've learned, and then you change based on what you've learned. So that's something else that we do.
One of the things I'd be interested in knowing is sort of how IT fits into the larger university strategic planning processes. Are you at the table?
Yep, yes, we are. So in fact, each of the colleges, so we just rolled out our 2019 strategic plan. So we had one from, let's see, 19, I think they created their first strategic plan in 13 or 14, I'm not sure which. But anyway, they just wrapped that one up in 2018. So we wrote a new strategic plan, and we have a group that writes the strategic plan for the university. So as they publish that strategic plan based on acceptance by the president and the board of regents and all that, then we move forward with rolling that out to the various departments and colleges with the perspective of they have to create their own strategic plans. So we created an IT community strategic plan. It wasn't a centralized plan, because there's still this concept around here that University Information Technology, what we call UIT, is this central group and they'll just take care of everybody. Well, we don't have the resources to do that. But those are the founding people that helped us start to put in place this IT community. So we've actually written an IT community strategic plan with input from all the colleges and departments that are a member of our IT community. Now, that doesn't mean that, back to what I said earlier, we have some departments that have still said, nope, we're not going to participate. We just let them go. And when they run into problems, they'll raise their hand and say, hey, I didn't know this was going on. Well, you're not part of the community. You've not come to the community meetings. You've not shared what you're doing, and you're suffering the consequences. And so what we've taken is the concept of helping people understand by being a part of it, we can help develop the strategy for the IT community. And that feeds into the colleges and the departments and their strategic plans. So yes, we're fully integrated into the university strategic plan.
Are there any particular barriers or challenges that you still sort of deal with? And I guess also sort of with your background coming into maybe a little bit different type of an organization than you've been working in. What's unique about a university or a government organization or a
Well,
public
they're a little
organization?
slow. They're a little slower to move. They like to assess a lot. They like to meet a lot. I mean, this is stuff that everybody knows in my mind anyway. But, there's I don't believe that I'm being hindered by saying you can't do something. But what you really want to make sure of is you have the stakeholders who you're impacting on board with what you're doing and why you're doing it. But that's back to communication. You would do that in a for-profit the same way you would do it in a university. What you tend to find in a university, though, is that, well, I'm the dean, or I'm a department head, or I'm a tenured faculty, and I don't like what you're doing. Well, I understand that, but we're not doing it just for you. We're doing it for the better of the university as a whole. And that's kind of a different concept when you think about what I've learned from both my Purdue experience as well as my MSU experience. Is sometimes it's still about my department or my research project. And don't get me wrong, those are all important, but you still have to have some sort of consistency across the university. That's probably one of the things. I think a barrier we continue to encounter is it's communication. As much as I'd like to talk about how we're listening better and we're doing more with listening and we're spending more time asking questions, we still mess it up once in a while and do something without asking people, and they sure let us know in a hurry that that was not right. So, and that's okay. That's kind of how life is. But if you understand that you can be open and honest about the communication process, and somebody can call me up and says, Trotter, you didn't do this or you didn't do this, and I know that I didn't, it's okay. I can say, got it. I'm okay with that.
So one last question. Do you have any recommendations for books or other resources or sort of?
Well, I think if you read Team of Teams and then there was a sister book, let me see if I can get the title real quick. One Mission is the follow-up book. And it's not just about McChrystal and those folks. I think any book that you have that talks about asking people and listening to people as to what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish. There's a book that I've read a couple times, but I'm now in the process. I'm going to use it again. It's The Advantage by Lenciani. The Leadership Challenge is an old book that I think that's one of, that's Posner, Barry Posner. But there's a lot of great books out there, but think about books that relate to getting close enough to your work that you understand what's being asked, that the people that are being asked understand that they can ask more questions, and so they fully understand what's being asked as opposed to jumping to conclusions. Those are the kinds of reading materials I'd recommend people to spend their time at, especially from a leadership perspective, because understand it's not just your title that makes you a leader. In fact, I think that's one of the fallacies. When I was a senior vice president, I had to be careful that if I walked into an operation and started asking questions about a specific topic, everybody thought, well, that's the only thing we should be working on. And they'd stop doing the work that was really value added and work on that because they thought, well, that's what Trotter wants us to work on. No. So we have to understand how our titles can impact what we have to say and how we say it, because we can create a lot of volume just because we're a vice president. So if we say the word go, it's a lot louder when you're a vice president than when you're a frontline supervisor. But I do believe that we can spend a lot more time not taking ourselves so seriously, but understanding the work that we do and why we do the work we do, and listening to people talk about what they think is value added in terms of work they do. So those are some of mine. I will say it this way, and I always say this, it's my favorite book of all time is Leadership is an Art by Max Dupree, the founder of Herman Miller Furniture. And I picked that book up many, many years ago when I was with Charles Schwab. I've read that book. In fact, I've got a copy of the book that looks like it's been, mangled, chewed on by the dog and everything else. My favorite quote in there, and now I've tailored the quote. Basically, I say, you cannot become what you need to be by remaining what you are. It's about, you've got to continually challenge yourself to change. And nobody likes change. That's human nature. We don't like change. His quote is, we cannot become what we need to be by remaining what we are. But my point being is, I really believe that as good leaders, if you think things are going really smooth, the first thing you might want to ask yourself is why? Why are they smooth, and what is it I don't know? And it's okay to say, gee, I didn't know that was going on. That's my perspective.
Mike, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experiences. I know my students will really appreciate hearing a different voice than mine. I don't have much of one this week, so. But thank you again. And are you coming over to Missoula sometime soon?
I've been over to Missoula a couple times. I probably will be back there in the springtime. And what I'll do is I'll look you up.
Great, appreciate it. Thank you very much. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.